There was also some pretty significant news in this issue, as we mentioned in the intro. Tim Richmond tested at Darlington, and he held his first public press conference since being hospitalized the previous December. That test at Darlington was held on a cloudy day, and temperatures were a cool 51 degrees, and Tim had a couple of laps at better than 160 miles an hour, and he had one at 159.9 miles an hour. And the track qualifying record at that time was Jeff Bodine's 159.157. So Tim was laying down laps that were quite a bit better than the track record.
Yeah, the press wasn't supposed to be there, but I was up in the press box at Darlington, and I wasn't alone. And we were timing Rick, and we'd look at each other and say, this is pretty darn good for a guy who's just come back from double pneumonia. I think we were impressed that he could do that well after the setback that he had.
Well, Steve, I remember when Ernie Irvan made his comeback. His first test was at Darlington. Mm-hmm. Now, what made Darlington the go-to track for drivers to kind of test out?
I really don't know the reason, but I do have a theory. I think, number one, Darlington was accessible, but number two, you have to consider that it's probably the toughest big track in NASCAR. So that might offer anybody testing to come back into racing the toughest test they can face. And if they can get past that, doing well, then the rest of it should be somewhat easier to adapt to, I think.
Well, Steve, here's another factor that I think might have had something to do with it. Darlington is close enough to Charlotte to get there fairly easily, to go there and back easily within a day. But it's also far enough away from Charlotte to where you could do a test and maybe not have everybody there watching.
Right.
If they had tested at Charlotte, everybody would have been there to see Tim Richmond.
That's right. That's what I mean by accessibility, because even if Charlotte said no press allowed, come on, somebody's going to show up.
Tim Richmond said in your story, after we got going, it was more or less a relief. I was pleased with our slower speeds because I thought they were pretty good. But then I guess my old self came back out. The car hadn't gotten sideways yet, so I figured we weren't going fast enough. Then we got going a little faster and everything came back. The aggressiveness to a racetrack and a car came back. Today is like the day after I first drove a race car, except that I went faster and didn't hit anything. Most of our listeners are going to know the details. They know that he had gotten sick in December and was treated at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, and it was announced as pneumonia. Okay.
Announced as pneumonia.
Yeah, it was announced as pneumonia, and we now know that it was AIDS. But Tim said in this story, the pneumonia was the first experience I ever had with anything that devastating. I saw a piece on television where the drivers talked about being scared in a race car. Believe me, I've been scared in a race car, but not nearly as scared as I was while in the hospital at the worst points of my illness. I normally avoid treatment when there is something wrong because I'm scared of doctors, dentists, and everything else. But at that point, I was just begging for them to do anything they could to make me feel better. It was the first time I didn't have control. It had me. I couldn't speed up the recovery and do what I wanted to do. It is hard to describe. It was a very scary deal, and I'm just glad to make it through. And Steve, there were rumors at the time that Tim had a cocaine problem. They had some sort of drug problem, and the rumor was there that he did have AIDS. And he addressed those rumors, and he did basically blow them off. And he said in this story, I think the success I had last year had something to do with that, referring to the rumors. You can attribute the rumors to a lot of the recent news generated by some other celebrities. That talk didn't bother me at all. It was more flattering or amazing to me that I had enough celebrity status to be put in that category.
It should be noted that this visit to the Cleveland Clinic was the crux of Tim's eventual demise from racing, because NASCAR demanded to see those records, and they would not turn them over to NASCAR. Now, what does that tell you? You can make a lot out of that, but the fact remains that NASCAR never got the full evidence it needed. And without that evidence, it would not let Tim continue to race.
I'm going to be honest with you. The quote from Harry Hyde, his crew chief, that's what truly jumped off the page at me. Here's what Harry had to say. You've known me for a long time. I put up a crust outside, but sometimes inside I cry. For a guy like Tim to run like he did last year and have all that harvest to reap this year and then to have to give it all up, it broke my heart. That right there is Tim Richmond's career in a nutshell. That is his story in a nutshell. Right. For a guy like Tim to run like he did in general throughout his career and then to give it all up, it broke my heart.
Tim Richmond's career overall, to me, is not what it was, but what it could have been.